17,423. The number arrived in my thoughts between one kill and the next, surfacing from whatever calculating engine still hummed beneath my consciousness. The heretic in front of me fell with his throat crushed, and I was already turning toward the next, my armored boots grinding bones into the mud that was once a city square. 17,424. The count continued without my permission. I had not asked for it, I did not want it, but something in the architecture of my modified brain had begun tallying, and now that the process had started, I could not make it cease. Brother Carmine was shouting something to my left, his voice distorted through my helm's failing vox speaker into a buzzing approximation of words. The sound meant nothing. Another body fell. 25. The heretics poured from the shattered administratum building like insects from a kicked hive, their crude weapons sparking against my ceramite as I pushed forward. I had done this before. I had done this so many times before. The thought should not have troubled me. Repetition was the foundation of war, and war was the foundation of purpose. But something had shifted in the mechanism of my thoughts. The counting would not stop. Squad Aurelius held the left flank. I knew this because I had ordered it, though I could not recall speaking the command. The battle had been raging for 11 hours, or perhaps 11 days. Time had become slippery in a way I had not experienced since my earliest implantation surgeries, when the pain had been so absolute that seconds stretched into eternities. But there was no pain now. There was only the count. 26, 27, 28. Each number a small death, a spark extinguished, a life ending beneath my hands or my blade, or the mass reactive rounds that erupted from my bolt pistol with rhythmic precision. Brother Sergeant Garrett. The voice came from behind me, from Brother Carmine, and I realized he had been calling my name for some time. How long? The question seemed suddenly important in a way I could not explain. The command post reports enemy reinforcements approaching from the eastern manufactorum district. I turned to face him. His armor was painted in the blue and gold of our chapter, the iconography of the Emperor's blessed sons gleaming despite the blood and ash that coated every surface. I had served beside Carmine for years, decades. I had watched him rise from scout to full battle brother, had spoken the words of commendation when he received his black carapace. I remembered this clearly, but when I tried to place the memory within a larger framework of time, to locate it within the span of my service, the architecture of my thoughts shuddered and produced only static. How long have we been planetside? The words left my mouth before I could stop them. An irrelevant question, a dangerous question. Space Marines did not ask such things because Space Marines did not need to know. We fought until the fighting was done. We killed until there was nothing left to kill. Time was a mortal concern, a weakness of the flesh we had long since transcended. Carmine's helm tilted slightly. Confusion, perhaps, or concern. 17 days, Brother Sergeant, since the initial drop pod assault. 17 days. The number should have meant something. Instead, it triggered a cascade of other numbers, other campaigns, other worlds whose names I could not quite recall. There had been a desert world where the sun never set. There had been a void station overrun with Xenos filth. There had been a hive city very much like this one, its spires reaching toward a sky choked with industrial smoke, and I had killed how many? The count had been running then too, I realized. The count had always been running, but I had never listened to it before. Another wave of heretics surged toward our position, and my body responded with the automatic precision of 3. Centuries of warfare, block, counter, thrust. The chainsword in my grip roared its mechanical hunger as I swept it through the press of bodies, ceramite teeth biting deep into corrupted flesh. 32, 33, 34. The numbers climbed with each swing, and somewhere beneath the calculated efficiency of my augmented brain, a voice I almost recognized was screaming. Brother Torval appeared at my shoulder, his heavy bolter spitting death into the oncoming horde. Torval. I knew that name. I had known him for how long? The question slipped away before I could grasp it, replaced by tactical considerations that demanded immediate attention. The heretics were poorly equipped but numerous. They fought with the desperate fury of the damned, throwing themselves onto our blades as if death itself were a gift they craved. I had seen such fervor before. I had seen it 100 times, 1,000 times on worlds whose names had faded from my memory like ink washed from parchment. The count reached 50, then 60. The combat continued and I continued with it, my body executing the killing forms that had been etched into my muscle memory during centuries of war. But something had broken loose in the sealed chambers of my consciousness, something that had been deliberately suppressed and was now forcing its way toward the light. I found myself examining Torval's armor as he fired, noting the scratches and dents that marked its surface. Each one was a story, a battle, a moment of survival. How many layers of repair had been applied to that armor? How many times had it been rebuilt around him? "Brother Sergeant," Carmine's voice again cutting through the din of combat. "The eastern approach is clear. Brother Captain Aldous orders us to advance toward the Cathedral District." Captain Aldous, another name that resonated with familiarity, though I could not quite place its origin. Had Aldous been my captain when I was elevated to the rank of sergeant? Had he commanded the company before that? During the campaign on, the name of the world escaped me, slipping through my thoughts like water through grating. There had been a campaign. There had been many campaigns. They stretched behind me like a corridor of mirrors, each reflecting the same images of death and duty into an infinite regression that I had never before attempted to examine. We advanced through the ruined streets, boots crunching over debris that had once been hab blocks housing thousands of Imperial citizens. The smoke hung thick and acrid, and my armor's auto-senses filtered it into a chemical breakdown that scrolled across my visor's display. Promethium, burned flesh. Ozone from discharged LS fire. Chemical residues from industrial processes that had continued even as the world fell into heresy. The data was meaningless. The data was always meaningless. But my brain continued to process it, continued to sort and catalog and analyze, because that was what my brain had been rebuilt to do. The cathedral rose before us, its Gothic spires somehow intact despite the destruction that had consumed the surrounding structures. Statues of the Emperor in his many aspects gazed down upon us, their stone faces serene and unchanging. I had seen cathedrals like this one on 100 worlds. Their architecture varied in the details but never in the essence. The same reaching towers, the same stained glass windows depicting the same holy scenes, the same altars where the faithful knelt to offer their prayers to a god who would never answer. The Imperium built its shrines the way it built its soldiers, according to templates designed 10,000 years ago, variations permitted only within carefully prescribed limits. We entered through a breach in the western wall, moving in tactical formation through the rubble-strewn nave. Heretics had taken shelter here, their corrupted banners hanging from the columns where devotional cloth should have fluttered. They died quickly, adding to my count in groups of 3 and 4. 72, 75, 79. The numbers climbed without meaning, without satisfaction, without even the grim purpose that should have accompanied the purging of traitors. I was killing because killing was my function, the purpose for which I had been designed and built and trained over the course of... The thought arrived with the force of a power fist to the chest, 300 years. I stopped moving. Around me the battle continued. Brother Torval's heavy bolter roaring, Brother Carmine's chainsword singing its hungry song, the screams of dying heretics echoing from the cathedral's vaulted ceiling. But I stood frozen in the center of the nave, staring at the altar where a corrupted priest was still reciting his blasphemous prayers, even as bolter rounds tore through the air around him. 300 years. The number was not new. I had always known it, in the same way I knew my own name or the words of the chapter's founding oaths, but I had never before understood what it meant. 300 years of campaigns, 300 years of killing, 300 years of watching brothers fall and rise and fall again, of armor being stripped from the dead and fitted to the living, of names and faces blurring together until they became indistinguishable from the landscapes of war itself. "Brother Sergeant?" Carmine's voice came from somewhere distant, muffled by the roaring in my ears that was not the sound of combat, but the sound of something far more terrible. the sound of 3 centuries collapsing into a single moment of comprehension. The corrupted priest fell, his prayers cut short by Brother Torval's concentrated fire. The last of the heretics died moments later, their blood pooling on the cathedral's ancient stone floor. The count stopped at 93. 93 dead in a single engagement that had lasted, how long? My internal chronometer told me 4 hours and 17 minutes, but time had lost all meaning. 4 hours was nothing against the weight of 300 years. Secure the perimeter. My voice emerged from my helm's vox grill, flat and mechanical, betraying nothing of the chaos that had erupted in my thoughts. I will survey the sacristy. I did not wait for acknowledgement. My boots carried me toward the small chamber at the rear of the cathedral, each step an echo of steps taken on 100 different worlds. The sacristy door hung ajar, its hinges twisted by some past violence, and beyond it lay the dim space where generations of priests had prepared for their devotions. Candles had been lit and allowed to burn down to stumps, their wax forming abstract sculptures on the floor. Holy texts lay scattered across the reading table, their pages torn and defaced with symbols that hurt my eyes to perceive. I removed my helm. The air struck my face with a coldness I had forgotten, carrying scents that my armor's filters had been sanitizing into sterile data. Incense still clinging to the fabrics. Mold growing in the corners where water had seeped through damaged stonework. The metallic tang of blood from the battle just concluded. I breathed it in, and the sensation triggered something I had not experienced in how long? I could not remember the last time I had breathed unfiltered air. The thought should have been trivial. Space Marines spent most of their lives sealed within their armor, breathing recycled atmosphere that had been processed through layers of filtration and chemical treatment. But as I stood in the ruined sacristy, drawing unprocessed air into lungs that were only partially organic, I found myself reaching for memories of other breaths, other moments of barefaced vulnerability, other instances when the world had touched my skin without the intermediary of ceramite and plasteel. There had been a garden once. The memory surfaced like a bubble rising through dark water, fragmentary and incomplete. A garden with yellow flowers that had swayed in a warm breeze. I had been small, impossibly small, my body unaugmented, my bones still human, my heart still beating with the irregular rhythm of natural flesh. I had reached out to touch one of the flowers, and its petals had felt like the memory dissolved before I could grasp it, replaced by the cathedral's incense-heavy darkness. I pressed my gauntleted hand against the stone wall, feeling nothing through the layered ceramite, and tried to understand what was happening to me. 300 years. The number had always been there, stored in the same mental archives that held my tactical training and my chapters, history, and the names of my battle brothers, past and present. But I had never before attempted to comprehend it as anything other than data. 300 years of war, 300 years of killing, 17,000 dead by my hand, and that was only the count I had been keeping today, a number that represented a tiny fraction of the total lives I had ended in the Emperor's name. I moved to the reading table and began sorting through the scattered texts, my hands working with automatic precision while my thoughts churned in unfamiliar patterns. Most of the books were worthless, their contents corrupted beyond recovery, but near the bottom of the pile I found something that made me stop breathing entirely. It was a letter, handwritten on actual parchment, the kind that had not been manufactured in significant quantities for centuries. The ink had faded to a color that might once have been blue, and the script was careful and deliberate in a style I almost recognized. I picked it up with fingers that trembled inside their armored housing, trembled, as if I was still capable of such mortal weakness, and began to read. To my mother, from the child you knew as Marcus. The words struck me with physical force, driving me back against the sacristy wall. Marcus. The name echoed in the hollow spaces of my memory, resonating with frequencies I had forgotten. Existed. Marcus. I had been Marcus once before the chapter had claimed me and remade me in the Emperor's image. I had written this letter during my early days as a neophyte, before the final surgeries had sealed away the last remnants of my human identity. I remembered writing it, the words forming slowly under a hand still learning to control its enhanced strength, the careful explanation of what I had become and what I would become, the farewell to a life I would never be able to resume. But I did not remember sending it. I did not remember where it had gone or why it was here, on a world I was certain I had never visited before. The letter continued, "I am told that you will never receive this. The chaplains say that communication with those we knew before is forbidden, that our old lives must be forgotten so that our new purpose can take root without distraction." But I needed to write these words, even if only for myself, even if only to prove that the boy you raised still exists somewhere inside this armored shell. They have changed my body in ways I do not fully understand. My hearts beat at different rhythms now. My blood carries proteins that can heal wounds which would have killed me before. I have eaten nothing but processed nutrition for months, yet I feel no hunger. I have slept only in brief intervals, yet I feel no fatigue. They tell me these changes will continue, that I will become something far beyond human capability, something designed to fight and kill for centuries. Centuries, Mother. They expect me to live for centuries. I do not know how to comprehend such a span of time. I am 17 years old, and already my memories of childhood seem distant, distorted, as if they happened to someone else. If I live for 300 years, will I remember anything of the boy who played in your garden, who learned to read from the scrolls you kept hidden from the administratum, who dreamed of traveling to worlds where the sky was not grey with industrial smoke? Will I remember your face, your voice, the way you held me when I woke from nightmares? I am afraid that I will forget. I am more afraid that I will not notice the forgetting. I lowered the letter, and my armored hand was shaking so violently that the ceramite joints produced an audible rattle. 300 years. I had lived 300 years, and somewhere in the first of those centuries, a boy named Marcus had written a letter to his mother and tucked it away in the pocket of his robe, intending to keep it as a talisman of the humanity he feared he would lose. I had not remembered writing it. I had not remembered Marcus's mother, or her garden, or the scrolls she had kept hidden. These memories had been stored somewhere deep in my brain, preserved but inaccessible, buried beneath layers of tactical programming and combat conditioning that had been installed over years of indoctrination. The letter fell from my trembling fingers and landed on the stone floor, its ancient parchment cracking at the impact. I stared at it, and something began to break open in my chest. Not a physical sensation, but a psychological one, a structural failure in the architecture of self that had sustained me through 3 centuries of war. How many memories had I lost? How many cells had I been and forgotten? I picked up the letter again, more carefully this time, and slid it into the storage compartment at my belt. Then I replaced my helm, sealing myself back inside the artificial environment of my armor, and walked out of the sacristy to rejoin my brothers. The cathedral was secure. Brother Carmine reported this as I emerged, his voice carrying the clipped efficiency expected of a proper Astartes communication. I nodded once, my helm's movement translating the gesture into data that his own armor would interpret. Everything was proceeding according to expectation. The heretics were dead. The sacred ground was purified. The campaign would continue. "Brother Sergeant." Torval approached, his heavy bolter held at rest against his shoulder. "You were gone for some time. Is something wrong? Something wrong?" The question was so inadequate to describe what had happened in that sacristy that I nearly laughed, a response that would have been so far outside my normal behavioral parameters that it would have triggered an immediate report to the chaplains. I suppressed the impulse with an effort that surprised me with its difficulty. I was examining the heretic texts for intelligence value. Nothing useful. The lie came easily. Another skill honed over 3 centuries of navigating the political complexities of chapter hierarchy. We moved to link up with Captain Aldous at the primary objective. We marched through the ruined streets, our formation tight and efficient, and I observed my brothers with eyes that had been somehow stripped of their tactical filters. Torval walked with a slight favoring of his left leg. An old injury, I realized from a campaign I could not name. Carmine's armor bore the marks of hasty repair work around the right pauldron. The craftsmanship subtly different from the rest of the suit. Had that section been replaced? Had an arm been lost and rebuilt? How much of each of us remained from our original construction, and how much had been swapped out piece by piece over the centuries. The thought led to others, each more disturbing than the last. I looked down at my own gauntleted hands, the ceramite fingers that responded to my neural impulses with perfect precision. These hands had killed thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands perhaps. I did not know the true count, had never tried to calculate it, had never considered it relevant. They had been rebuilt multiple times, I knew. Damage from combat, from corrosive environments, from the simple wear of centuries of use. The tech Marines replaced damaged components as needed, maintaining each suit of power armor as a sacred relic to be, preserved across generations. But what of the flesh inside the armor? What of the brain that directed the hands, the hearts that pumped blood through the enhanced musculature, the cells that regenerated according to the Primarch's genetic template? I tried to remember the face I had been born with, and found nothing but darkness. The command post was located in a fortified bunker that had once served as an administratum records facility. Captain Aldous met us at the entrance, his ancient armor gleaming despite the grime of combat, the sigils of his rank freshly painted in gold that caught the light from the damaged lumens overhead. I had served under Aldous for decades, or I thought I had. The certainty I had always felt about such matters had developed cracks that were spreading with every passing moment. "Brother Sergeant Garrett, your squad performed admirably." The captain's voice was deep and resonant, carrying the weight of authority that came from his rank and the enhanced vox speakers built into his gorget. "The Cathedral District is secure ahead of schedule. The heretic command structure is fragmenting." "Thank you, Captain." The words emerged from my mouth without conscious direction, following scripts that had been burned into my brain through centuries of repetition. "What are our orders for the next phase?" Aldous outlined the tactical situation with his usual precision, describing enemy positions and friendly assets, reinforcement schedules and ammunition allocations, objectives and contingencies. I absorbed the information automatically, my enhanced memory storing every detail for later analysis. But beneath the surface of tactical engagement, my thoughts continued their strange new trajectory. I watched Captain Aldous as he spoke, studying the face that peered out from beneath his ornate helm. How old was he? The question should have had a simple answer. All Space Marines knew their own age and the ages of their superiors. But when I tried to recall the specific figures, I found only more uncertainty. Aldous had been a captain when I received my first command, but that could have been 50 years ago, or 100 or 200. The campaigns blurred together, their chronologies confused, their details fragmenting under examination. "Brother Sergeant?" The captain's voice cut through my distraction. "Do you have questions about the operation?" "No, Captain, the orders are clear." Another automatic response delivered with the appropriate tone of confident deference. "Squad Aurelius will be ready to move on your command." The briefing concluded, and I led my squad to the assembly point designated for our next push. The streets around us were filled with the sounds of war, distant bolter fire, the rumble of rhino transports moving troops into position, the screaming of the wounded being carried to medici stations that could do little for those beyond the Emperor's mercy. Normal sounds, the sounds I had lived with for 3 centuries, but they seemed different now, sharper, more distinct, as if some filter had been removed from my perception, allowing me to hear what had always been there but never acknowledged. I found myself stopping at a junction where a massive Imperial statue had fallen across the roadway, its stone features cracked and weathered beyond recognition. The figure might once have represented a saint or a governor or some other worthy of the Imperium, but time and violence had reduced it to an anonymous ruin. I stared at the blank face, and a strange thought occurred to me. In 300 years, would anyone remember me? The question was absurd. Space Marines did not seek remembrance. We were instruments of the Emperor's will, our individual identities subsumed into the greater glory of the chapter and the Imperium. Our names were recorded in the histories that the chaplains maintained, but those records were for administrative purposes, not commemoration. We died, and others took our place, and the war continued. That was the proper order of things. But Marcus had written a letter to his mother, and Marcus had been afraid of forgetting. I reached into my belt compartment and touched the folded parchment hidden there, feeling its fragility through my armored fingertips. The letter had survived for centuries, somehow finding its way to this world, to this cathedral, to this moment when I would discover it and remember the name I had forgotten. How had it gotten here? The question nagged at me as we continued toward our assembly point. I had written the letter on the chapter's homeworld. During my neophyte training, in quarters I still remembered if I concentrated hard enough. Small stone rooms with narrow cots, designed to accustom us to the Spartan conditions we would endure for the rest of our lives. I had written at a desk made of recycled plasteel, using a stylus that felt too large in my still transforming hands. And then, the memory fractured. I could not recall what I had done with the letter after writing it. Had I hidden it somewhere, given it to someone? The answers were gone, erased by time or by design. We reached the assembly point, a fortified plaza surrounded by burned-out hablocks that had been cleared of heretic presence. Other squads were already gathering, their blue and gold armor forming clusters of color against the gray devastation. I led my brothers to our designated position and began the ritual checks. Ammunition counts, armor status, weapon functionality. The tasks were familiar enough to perform without thought, leaving my conscious mind free to continue its troubling analysis. Brother Davin approached from the direction of the command post, his gait carrying the subtle impatience that marked him as a younger battle brother still adjusting to the measured pace of seniority. I knew Davin. I remembered his ascension to full battle brother status, the ceremony where I had spoken words of welcome on behalf of Squad Aurelius. But when had that been? Brother Sergeant Garrett. Davin's voice was tight with something that might have been concern. Captain Aldous requests your presence. There is a matter requiring your personal attention. The hesitation in his words triggered an immediate alert in my tactical awareness. I nodded once and followed him back toward the command bunker, my hand unconsciously moving to rest on the hilt of my chainsword. Whatever awaited me, my body was preparing for combat. The captain was waiting in a small chamber off the main command area, a space that might once have served as a records office. A table had been placed in the center, and on it rested an object that made me stop in the doorway with such abruptness that Brother Davin nearly collided with my back. It was a helm. Specifically, it was my helm, not the one currently mag-locked to my belt, but an older version. One that showed the wear of years and the distinctive damage pattern of a specific type of Xenos weapon. I recognized it immediately, though I could not have said from which campaign it originated. The helm was mine, and yet I had no memory of losing it, no memory of it being replaced, no memory of the circumstances that had led to its removal from my possession. We recovered this during the sweep of the Administratum archives, Captain Aldous said, his voice carefully neutral. It was in a storage case marked for evidence preservation. There were other items as well. He gestured to the table, and I saw now that the helm was not alone. There were 3 more helms arranged beside it, each showing different patterns of damage, each marked with the same designation painted on the rim, Garrett, G, and beside the helms a stack of data slates, and beside those a collection of parchment documents that I recognized with a sick certainty even before I read the first words. Letters. Letters written by hand in a script I knew as intimately as I knew the grip of my chainsword. Letters addressed to a mother I could not remember, written by a boy named Marcus, who had been afraid of forgetting. I requested that the chaplains examine these materials before bringing them to your attention, Aldous continued. They determined that the documents are authentic and potentially significant to your spiritual welfare. They also determined that you should be given the opportunity to examine them and to make certain decisions regarding their disposition. I moved forward without conscious decision, my boots carrying me to the table where the artifacts of my forgotten lives lay arranged like evidence in a trial. My armored fingers touched the nearest helm, tracing the scar left by whatever weapon had ended its service. I should have remembered this damage. I should have remembered the moment when it occurred, the battle that had necessitated its replacement, the rituals that had been performed to consecrate a new helm to replace the fallen one. I remembered nothing. How many? My voice emerged hoarse, stripped of the controlled authority I had maintained for centuries. How many have there been? The records we found are incomplete. The captain's voice remained carefully neutral, but I heard something beneath it. Concern, perhaps, or the wariness of a commander facing an unknown variable. But based on the evidence preserved in these archives, you have served in this chapter's colors for 314 years. During that time, you have been rebuilt on no fewer than 7 occasions. 7. The number struck me with more force than any of the kills I had counted that day. 7 reconstructions. 7 times when my body had been damaged beyond repair, when the apothecarian had harvested what could be saved and the tech marines had built a new shell around the salvaged components. 7 times when I had died and been reborn, my memories fragmenting with each transition, my identity reconstructing itself around whatever core elements had survived the process. The letters, I said, and my voice cracked on the word. Why are there so many? You wrote them, the captain replied, each time, after each reconstruction, as if you knew you would forget and were trying to preserve some record for yourself. I picked up the topmost letter, unfolding it with hands that trembled despite their power-armored enclosure. The script was my own, but the words came from a stranger, a version of myself I did not recognize, writing from a perspective I could not access. Dear Mother, it began. I do not know if you ever received my first letter. I do not know if you are still alive to receive this one. It has been 117 years since I was taken for the Emperor's service, and I have died twice since then. I stopped reading. The words blurred before my eyes. Those space marines were not supposed to produce tears. I set the letter down and reached for another, then another, shuffling through a stack of confessions that spanned centuries. Dear Mother, I no longer remember your face. Dear Mother, I have killed so many that the numbers have lost all meaning. Dear Mother, they rebuilt me again, and this time I think they took something important, something I cannot name but desperately miss. Dear Mother, I am afraid that I am no longer the boy you loved. I am afraid that boy died long ago, and I am merely his echo, repeating his fears because I have no fears of my own. The letters ended abruptly, the final one dated to a campaign I vaguely remembered, almost 80 years ago. Since then, nothing. Since then, I had apparently stopped writing, stopped trying to preserve the fragments of humanity that each reconstruction stripped away. What happened? I asked, addressing the captain without turning to face him. Why did I stop? The chaplains have a theory. Aldous moved to stand beside me, his presence a solid weight in the small chamber. They believe that after a certain number of reconstructions, the human personality becomes unstable. The mind cannot continue integrating new traumas with old memories, cannot reconcile multiple deaths with continuous existence, and so it simplifies. It discards the problematic elements and focuses on what remains functional. I understood what he was not saying. Somewhere in the past 80 years, some previous version of myself had decided that these letters, these memories, these fragments of humanity were problems to be discarded. That version had locked them away in an evidence archive on a world that chapter records indicated I had never visited. That version had tried to destroy what could not be easily destroyed, had tried to forget what kept reasserting itself despite every effort to suppress it. Why am I seeing this now? I asked. Why did the chaplains decide to show me? The captain was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight I had never heard from him before. Because the chaplains believe you are close to another reconstruction. The apothecarian reports that your current body is showing signs of systemic degradation that cannot be halted, only managed. Within the next decade, perhaps sooner, you will require the Tech Marine's intervention to continue your service. Another death, another rebirth, another forgetting. And when that happens, I said, the words forming themselves without conscious intent, this will happen again. I will discover these letters, these helms, this evidence of all the selves I have been and forgotten. I will stand in a room like this one and feel what I am feeling now, and then I will decide to hide it all away again because that is what I do. That is what I always do. That is the pattern the chaplains have observed, yes. I looked at the helms, the letters, the data slates containing records of campaigns I had fought and forgotten. 300 years of war, 7 deaths and rebirths, an uncountable number of kills, each one meaning less than the last. What would happen, I asked, if I did not hide them away this time? If I kept the letters, studied them, tried to integrate the memories they contain? The chaplains considered that possibility. The captain's voice had become very careful, as if he were handling an unexploded ordnance shell. They concluded that such an attempt would likely result in psychological fragmentation. Your mind is not designed to process multiple lifetimes simultaneously. The personalities would conflict, the memories would contradict, the cognitive load would overwhelm your ability to function effectively in combat, and I would become a liability. Yes. I picked up the oldest letter, the one written by a 17-year-old boy named Marcus, who had been afraid of forgetting his mother's face. The parchment was so fragile now that even my careful grip threatened to tear it. 300 years this letter had survived, passed from hand to hand, hidden and recovered and hidden again by the various versions of myself who had written and preserved, and lost and found it. There is another option, I said. One the chaplains did not suggest because they would not consider it acceptable. The captain said nothing, but I felt his attention sharpen. I could refuse the reconstruction. When my body fails, I could simply let it fail. No more deaths, no more rebirths, no more letters written to a mother who has been dead for centuries. The silence stretched between us, filling the small chamber with a pressure that seemed to squeeze against my armor from all sides. What I was suggesting was not suicide, not exactly. Space Marines did not take their own lives, as such action would be a betrayal of the Emperor's gift, but refusing medical intervention, accepting the natural end of a body that had exceeded its operational lifespan. The chaplains would debate whether such a choice constituted heresy. That would be your decision to make, the captain said finally. I cannot order you to accept reconstruction, nor can I order you to refuse it. The choice is between you and the Emperor. I looked at the letters one more time. All those versions of myself, all those deaths and rebirths, all those attempts to hold on to something human in the face of centuries of war. The campaign, I said. How long till we achieve victory? 2 weeks, perhaps 3. The heretic resistance is crumbling faster than projected. 2 weeks, enough time to complete my duty here, to see this battle through to its conclusion. After that, I would return to the chapter's homeworld and submit to the apothecarian's assessment, and then I would make my choice, reconstruction and forgetting, or death and whatever lay beyond it. I gathered the letters into a careful stack and placed them in my belt compartment beside the first letter I had discovered in the sacristy. The helms I left where they lay. They were relics now, artifacts of men who no longer existed. But the letters would come with me. Brother Sergeant, the captain's voice stopped me at the door. For what it is worth, I knew you. Before your first reconstruction, I was a sergeant then, and you were newly elevated to tactical squad. You were different. I turned back to face him. Different how? You laughed. I remember the sound of it echoing through the training halls. It was a rare thing even then. Space Marines are not given to levity, but you found moments of joy where others saw only duty. I tried to imagine what that might have felt like, finding joy in the midst of war. The concept seemed impossible, like trying to visualize a color that did not exist. Thank you, Captain, for telling me. I returned to my squad and resumed the duties that had defined my existence for 300 years. But something had changed in the mechanism of my thoughts, some gear that had been frozen for decades now turning again. I watched my brothers prepare for combat, and I wondered what versions of themselves they had. Forgotten. I watched the war unfold around us, and I wondered how many times I had watched the same patterns of death and destruction without recognizing their repetition. The battle for the cathedral district continued for another 6 hours, and my count reached 247. Each kill felt different now, not more significant exactly, but more present. I was aware of them in a way I had not been aware of anything for longer than I could remember. The heretics died, and I knew that I was killing them, and I knew that I would remember killing them at least until my next reconstruction. if there was a next reconstruction. We pushed through the enemy lines and secured the final objective, a communications hub that had been coordinating heretic resistance across the continent. The fighting was fierce but brief, the outcome never in doubt. When the last of the traitors fell, I stood in the blood-soaked control room and felt something I could not quite identify. Not satisfaction, not relief, something stranger and more fragile. Brother Carmine approached, his armor scorched and dented from a close engagement with a heretic champion. Brother Sergeant, we have received word from command. The planetary governor has surrendered. The campaign is effectively concluded. I nodded, absorbing this information with the same automatic efficiency that processed all tactical data. The campaign was over. We had won, as we had won 100 campaigns before, as we would win 100 campaigns after. The Imperium would claim this world, purge its corruption and rebuild its infrastructure for continued service to the God Emperor of mankind, and I would return to the chapter's homeworld and face my choice. Assemble the squad, I said. We returned to the command post for debriefing. The march back was quiet, the sounds of battle fading behind us as resistance collapsed across the city. I walked among my brothers, their blue and gold armor familiar and strange at the same time, and I thought about what the captain had told me. I had laughed once. I had found joy in the midst of war. I tried to remember what that had felt like, and found only emptiness. But there was something else there too, something that had not been present that morning when the battle began. A question, perhaps, a spark of curiosity that the years had nearly extinguished but had not quite managed to destroy. I pulled out the oldest letter and read the final lines again. I am afraid that I will forget. I am more afraid that I will not notice the forgetting. Young Marcus had been right to be afraid. I had forgotten and I had not noticed. And now I was standing in the ruins of a world I had helped to break while carrying the accumulated weight of 3 centuries of war. But I had noticed now, and that, perhaps, was something. The debriefing was brief and efficient, the captain reviewing our performance with his usual clinical precision. When it concluded, I found myself lingering in the command post, watching the other sergeants depart with their squads. Brother Davin caught my eye and hesitated, as if wanting to speak, then thought better of it and followed the others out. I was alone. I pulled out all the letters, spreading them across the briefing table in chronological order. 12 letters spanning 300 years, each one a message from a version of myself I could not remember to a mother who had been dead for centuries. The handwriting evolved from letter to letter, not in skill but in character. Some versions wrote with tight, controlled precision, while others sprawled across the page with a desperate urgency that seemed to leak through the parchment itself. The 5th letter was different from the others. It was shorter, almost terse, and its content broke from the pattern of the previous 4. I found your letters today, it began. The other letters, the ones I wrote before. I do not remember writing them, but I recognize my own hand. It is a strange thing to read words from a self you do not recall being. They tell me I have been rebuilt 3 times. They tell me I have forgotten you 3 times. They tell me I keep writing these letters, keep trying to hold on to something that slips away with each new death. I do not know why I continue. Perhaps because the alternative is to accept that I am no longer the son you raised, that the boy you loved died during his first reconstruction and everything since has been an echo. Perhaps because stopping would mean admitting defeat, and I was not built to accept defeat. But I think there is another reason, one I am only now beginning to understand. These letters are not for you, Mother. They were never for you. You have been dead for over a century, and no letter could ever reach you even if you still lived. These letters are for me, for the next version of me, the one who will find them and read them and know that he has always been afraid, that he has always been human, beneath all the armor and augmentation and conditioning. That is what I am truly afraid of losing. Not your memory, though that is precious beyond measure. What I am afraid of losing is the capacity to be afraid at all. I set the letter down and stared at it for a long time. The version of myself who had written these words had understood something fundamental, something I was only now beginning to grasp. The fear was not a weakness. The fear was evidence of humanity, a proof that something remained of the child who had played in his mother's garden, who had dreamed of distant worlds, who had been afraid of what he would become. And I was still afraid. After 300 years and 7 reconstructions, after countless deaths and rebirths, after more kills than any human mind should ever be asked to bear, I was still afraid. I gathered the letters and replaced them in my belt compartment. Then I walked out of the command post, into the grey light of a world slowly emerging from the smoke of its own damnation. And I made my choice. I would accept the reconstruction. I would undergo the death and rebirth that my body required. I would forget these letters, forget this moment, forget the brief window of self-awareness that had opened in the mechanism of my thoughts. But first, I would write one more letter, not to hide it away for my future self to find, but to leave it where anyone might discover it. A testament to the fear that kept me human. A record that, somewhere inside this armored shell, a boy named Marcus was still struggling to remember his mother's face. I found a sheet of parchment in the command post supplies and a stylus that fit awkwardly in my gauntleted fingers. The words came slowly, each one a struggle against centuries of conditioning. To whoever finds this letter, my name was Marcus, once. I have been other names since then, and I will be other names after, but I was Marcus first, and I want someone to know that Marcus was afraid. He was afraid of forgetting, and he was right to be afraid, because forgetting is what we do. We forget in order to continue. We forget in order to fight. We forget in order to survive the weight of centuries that no human mind was ever meant to carry. But somewhere beneath all the forgetting, something remains. A spark of fear that is also a spark of humanity. A voice that keeps writing letters to a mother who will never read them, because the writing is more important than the receiving. A child who refuses to die even as the soldier is rebuilt again and again. I am 314 years old. I have died 7 times. I will die again soon, and when I wake, I will not remember any of this. But I want someone to know that I was here, that I was afraid, that being afraid meant I was still human, and I want someone to know that I chose to continue anyway. Not because I am brave, but because the alternative is to stop being afraid, and that would mean stopping being human. Better to die 7 times and remember fear than to live forever and feel nothing at all. I signed the letter with the name that had been given to me at my latest reconstruction, Garrett. Then I folded it and placed it in a crevice in the command post wall where it might survive for years or centuries before someone discovered it. The campaign was over. The war, of course, would never end. There would always be another world to purge, another heresy to crush, another enemy to destroy in the Emperor's name. I would fight those wars as I had fought this one, with the mechanical precision that 3 centuries of training had burned into my muscles and my mind. But somewhere inside me, a boy named Marcus would continue to write letters, and somewhere in the Imperium, those letters would survive, waiting for the next version of myself to find them and know that he had always been afraid. I walked back to my squad, feeling the weight of my armor settle around me like a second skin. Brother Carmine looked up at my approach, his helm tilting in a question he did not voice. "We move out at dawn," I said, my voice carrying the flat authority that command required. "Prepare the squad for transport." "Yes, Brother Sergeant." I watched him relay the orders, watched my brothers respond with the disciplined efficiency that marked them as a start, and I felt something that might have been pride, or might have been grief, or might have been some emotion that had no name in any language I knew. 300 years, 17,000 kills in a single day, 7 deaths and rebirths, each one stripping away another layer of the boy who had once played in his mother's garden. And still, somehow, I was afraid. It was the most human thing I had felt in centuries.